and welcome to the last session of the Pikes Peak Preservation Forum number 4. I'm Tim Boddington. I'm president of the Historic Preservation Alliance, and essentially I'm a former window person. I used to work for Marvin Windows and Doors for decades, and so my knowledge of historic double-hung windows in particular is fairly extensive, having replaced windows in wonderful buildings like the Broadmoor, Maine Hotel, the Hibbards building, great old buildings I got to crawl through, and so I have a lot of experience with old double hungs. But when you start with a double hung, then you better, at least through this video, learn what the terminology is so you can be conversant with whomever you're speaking with at some point, whether you're doing the work yourself or whether you hire a professional. But the point is, you should know what all the parts and pieces are called. So this is a double hung window. It doesn't have to have glass in the top sash, but it is a two sash. It's what we call two light double hung. If there were divided lights in here, those divided lights come with munts and bars. Munts are intermittent, bars are continuous. They carry the strength of the wind load, and they are designed either for single glaze or for insulated units. In modern windows, they can still be the same historic dimension, but they're actually fake, and they're glued to the surface of the glass. They have an interior spacer bar to make it look like it's a piece of insulated glass, but with too many individual pieces of insulated glass and you have too much heat loss, so they put in what are called simulated divided lights. My point being that divided lights are nomenclature that is based on first width, then height. So whenever you're talking about the dimensions of your window, it's always width before height. So in this particular case, many old double hung windows, the manufacturers were in shops. If you're from Colorado Springs, then you'd remember Chrissy Fowler Lumber Company. They had a shop. And so they would build these check rail sash. This top sash, this bottom sash, it's a check rail pair of sash because they check at the middle meeting rail. This is called the check rail. So when you measured, then you would measure the glass size. This is 30 by 30. The nomenclature would say this is a 30-30 two-light double hung. And that would be enough for an old window guy to know exactly what you wanted, and he'd build it for you. What happens after that is some of the other things that you ought to know are, is this window 1 3/8 thick or 1 3/4? And there are even a few rare cases here where there might be 1 3/4 thick sash. Doors often are 1 3/4 thick. Sash in double hung windows are not often 1 3/4, but there are plenty of them that are. And it's measured, if you will, right in here. The channel that is created for the window to slide up and down on is just wide enough for the sash to move. It has a piece of wood that separates the two sash that's called parting stop. That parting stop is continuous from the bottom to the top and has to be removed in order to take the sash out, at least the top sash. This piece just behind the sash is called the parting stop also. The blind stop. And then you come to what is called exterior flat casings, or it could be a detailed profile. It can be lots of different widths. This is 4 3/4. It also is what we call, in the terminology of the industry, it's 5/4, meaning it's made out of wood that was originally cut 1 1/4 thick, and now it's surfaced and planed down to 1 1/16. Most of these windows were either made out of pine, probably ponderosa pine, or fir. And they've held up really well. They were not pressure treated or preservative treated in any way decades ago. They were all made just out of beautiful pine, all clear, no knots, just gorgeous wood. They were nailed, not screwed, and they were put together with things that maybe are not visible, but just a wood plug, a dowel that goes clear through the mortise and the tenon and it ends up being a very solid joint, and it's held up for, I'm guessing this window came out of the Stearman House up where Penrose Hospital was, and it was probably built in the early 1900s or late 1800s, so you know, it's over 100 years old. So it's an incredibly durable window still. So let's make our way down. We started up here at the top sash. We work our way down, we come to the sill. And the sill is oftentimes built out of two parts because you see the step. And this step then has a piece that goes all the way out to the edge of the casing. And that particular piece is what we call horned. The sill is notched so that it goes behind this stepped piece that's the primary sill to the sub-sill that then receives the flat casing. But it has to be notched, or horned as we call it, so that when it slides into the opening in the house, just behind this casing is the sheathing on the house. So it goes right up against it, and that's what seals it into the opening. So now that we've seen this window put into place, this is just decorative trim that comes after the fact. It could be anything or it could be nothing. It could just be the flat casing. But in many cases, there is also then a piece of flashing that would come out and just lip over either this trim piece or the casing, and that helps seal it because the flashing piece is tucked up underneath the siding. And so the siding comes down, the flashing is behind it, and comes out and lips over. New window installations use a combination of flexible tapes, they're called, and they're designed to work in conjunction with all of the new air infiltration barriers like Tyvek. These tapes then seal around the Tyvek, onto the Tyvek, behind the flat casings, or nail thin if it's a new window, and it just makes it a waterproof and airtight installation. The air exchanges in an old double hung, it's called a double hung because you could, in fact, see what happens when I loosen this because the ropes are not attached, but a combination of this creates a beautiful convection. And in the old homes, many times these windows were big and installed very close to the top of the ceiling where all the heat builds up. And by being able to create a convection, you would cool a home very efficiently. Their summers probably weren't going to be as brutal as ours are these days, but they were remarkably efficient. But the crazy thing is now, everybody moves into a house, paints the windows so that the top sash is now what we effectively call stuck in place. You've weatherproofed it in a sense because you're not going to get much air infiltration through that paint, but it's not very functional at that point. It's no longer a double hung. And to complicate matters, many of the old storm windows, the tradition was you go out, you put a storm window up for the winter, you take the storm sash down because the storm sash was glass top and bottom. You take it off in the summer and you had a full screen so that you could utilize the advantage of the convection that comes from a double hung. So now that we sort of looked at the outside, I'd like to flip the window so that we can then look at the inside, and we'll talk about the steps necessary to remove the sash in order to service it. And hopefully, if you know the old Leave It to Beaver story of the baseball going through the window, a lot of these things can be repaired from the outside. If it's glass breakage, you don't need to remove the glass or remove the sash, but occasionally you have to service it and you need to get the window out because you may need to do something like replace the ropes. And I'll show you how we're going to get to the ropes in just a second. The weights, you'd have to remove the casing. That means all of the paint, all of those paint lines, everything has to be cut. Take a razor knife and you can cut them, and then gently start prying the trim off. But that's sort of a lengthy, long-term project. It takes several hours to really be careful about removing the trim so you don't damage it. Because there are plenty of nails. I don't know if it's visible to see, but there are nail holes pretty frequently here that indicate how often they nailed the trim on. So it just takes a while. But to get the sash out, the inside has a stop. This is what we call an OG stop. It has a nice little profile to it, and it can be pried off. Now I've taken this one off before, so it's going to look easy by comparison. But what makes this one easier by comparison, for sure, is that it's stained and not painted. If it's painted, then I'm going to have to get a razor knife in here and cut it so that as I pry it off, it doesn't break a lot of the old lead-based paints and produce great big chunks of missing paint that don't often look good when you put it all back. So you'd have to do a lot of sanding, and we don't want to do a lot of sanding with oil-based paints, so we'd rather just get it off very carefully. So this one happened to be stained, and that makes it really lovely. It's going to pry off quite easily. See the number of nails. So we've got the stop off. The sash now is going to be able to be removed, but that's only the bottom sash. So it's going to be able to be moved a little bit, and then the rope's going to come loose. If the ropes are still attached to the weights, then it would be important to get a pair of, say, vice grips, and put a little vice grip up here so that when you pull the sash out and loosen it here, it doesn't suddenly with the weight just go zipping all the way down. You want to hold it in its relative position so that it's there to access when it's time to return the sash. But the sash will come out. This sash is what we call plowed for rope and pulley. So the rope sits here, has a knot on the end of it, which you can see. It's a nice knot. And this is cotton cord. We don't recommend nylon or anything like that that's synthetic because it tends to stretch, and it sometimes just stops functioning well, and then it gets all fibrous with the tension, the friction up here. The nylon starts to get fuzzy, and it doesn't look right. So we stick with good old cotton cord, and you can find it online. They'll talk about it specifically as rope and pulley cord for old double hungs. So now we have it out. We can do what repair work we need to do. The next sash, in order to get the top sash out, the interior blind stop has to be removed. That becomes a little more challenging, and it often requires boogering it up just a little bit. Okay. I neglected to mention that without having to take the window apart, which is to say take all the interior trim off in order to access the weights, if the weights are there, you know they're not in the basement, then there is in many old double hungs a means in which to access that area near the bottom of the window with just a sash lifted up and out of the way. And it's called a weight pocket access. It isn't easy to see, so I'm going to move the window this way. And you can see the wood is cut. And there's a little horizontal cut here. There are a couple of nails that are in at an angle because there's a scarf joint. The joint is at an angle. And down here, there's just a hint of a screw. The screw, of course, is going to be covered with paint, but we have sort of removed a little bit, and I'm going to try to back this screw out
Now, from my angle, if I pull and pull down now, look, I can access the weight pocket. And it's pretty cool. It generally shows up as just a horizontal line on the window. Not all double hung windows have this access point, but most do. And the good news is with that access, you should be able to thread a new piece of rope over the top, let it come all the way down, reach in and attach it. And then the next step, of course, is to figure out the exact proportions, the exact length of the rope, so that when the window is in its proper position, whether it's all the way up as a top sash, then the weight is pretty far up, so that when you pull it, not pretty far up, it's actually pretty far down, so that when you lower the top sash, there's still plenty of rope play to allow the weight to go up. And then conversely, when it's all the way down, which is to say the bottom sash is all the way in place, then the weight is going to be pretty far up, so that as you lift the bottom sash, there's plenty of room for it to come down. So anyway, that weight pocket is pretty cool, and it's, generally speaking, really handy, but it takes a while to get all the paint and everything off of it. And if the parting stop is in place, you're going to have to loosen the parting stop too, which is to say pry it out a little bit. It came out really easily because the parting stop was not in place. But when it is in place, then you're going to have to work around the parting stop a little bit just so that you can loosen the cap, because you can sort of see here in profile, there's the channel for the parting stop. So that's why that parting stop has to be removed a little bit. So anyway, that is the weight pocket. Thank you.